Hello, I'm Tasha Waters, and thanks for watching my show. Today I'm reading from Shamans and Kushtakas, North Coast Tales of the Supernatural. This story is called Owl Woman. A young woman, the wife of a high caste man, did not get along with her mother-in-law. As was the custom, the young couple lived with the husband's parents in a screened-off section of the clan house, which they shared with other close relatives. Before her marriage as the daughter of the chief and her father's darling, the young wife had been given whatever she wished and had her own way in almost anything. Spirited and strong-willed, the wife resented having to defer to the wishes of her mother-in-law, mistress of the house. Her husband, highly regarded in his own village for his hunting and fishing prowess, had won her hand with his wealth and position. At first, he was delighted with his prize, finding his wife's high spirits and saucy manner amusing, so he too indulged her whenever possible. But when she made no attempt to adjust to the household hierarchy and submit to her mother-in-law's authority, friction arose between the two women. She avoided her husband's mother as much as possible and behaved rudely when addressed by her. Eventually, her behavior was brought to the attention of her doting husband, who at last was compelled to speak with her. "Why are you so cross with my mother?" the husband asked in an attempt at peacemaking. "I can't stand her bossiness," she answered with a toss of her head. "Nobody has ordered me around like this before, and I don't like it." "Try to hide your feelings and be a little patient," he pleaded. "Somebody has to run the house or there would be chaos. My brother's wives get along with her. They think she's a tyrant too. They're just afraid to stand up to her." "Well, she's in charge. Can't you at least try to tolerate her?" But the wife continued to play the spoiled child, and the husband, who at first thought her edginess was due to coming into a new household, began to find her behavior trying. The mother-in-law, who reveled in her authority, was not blameless. Early on, she sensed her daughter-in-law's hostility toward her and saw a challenge in it. "I'll get that little lady into line in short order," she vowed, and took every opportunity to do so. First, there was the episode of the fish. A load of salmon came in just as the young wives were leaving to pick berries. "You will have to stay to help fillet and preserve the fish," she told the young wife. "Why me?" she asked. "Your husband's boat brought it in." "It can wait until evening," she snapped, not missing her step with the others heading for the woods. "Not in this heat. The men were detained 2 days by rough water, and the fish need attention right away." "Come, my wife, and prepare our fish," her husband said, embarrassed at what he saw as her shirking her duties. As at his stern tone, she turned back. "Shall we stay to help?" one sister-in-law asked. "No, you go pick berries," the young wife answered. No use turning the other women against her too. She went over to the baskets of fish and, under the older woman's gloating eye, set about filleting her husband's catch. Ordinarily, she gloried in being the wife of the man who was able to provide the village with greatly needed fish, but this time her joy had been squelched. It was not accidental that her husband provided more fish, meat, or furs than the other men. As a young man, he had followed the tribal ritual of bathing, fasting, and taking devil's club juice to instill the proper attitude for receiving his uncle's special weasel gift. The spirit had come to him when he had first reached manhood. He had fasted for 8 days in the woods in an area where weasels were known to live. On the last day of his fast, he came upon a huge weasel sitting on a log and cracking a small crab he brought up from the water. The man stopped short, never having seen such a large weasel. The weasel turned and looked at him. Their eyes met and locked. First, the young man was seized with dizziness, then a feeling of euphoria came over him as the weasel looked away and went about its business. From that day on, he felt possessed of supernatural powers. He could sense it when it was about to rain or when the weather would be crisp. His instincts for the feeding places of game and fish would become stronger, and he was always successful at hunting or fishing. But he kept his secrets to himself. At first, He was pleased that he was able to delight his bride with his hunting and fishing prowess, but as time went on, her self-centered acceptance of his accomplishments saddened him. Smaller skirmishes between the two women continued to occur, but nothing major happened for several months. Then, with the onset of winter, a woman was brought in to make fur robes for the wives of all the sons. Again, it was the young woman's husband who had supplied most of the marten and even one white sea otter. Ecstatic, the young wife wrapped herself in the otter and paraded before her husband. "I will be stunning in a long white otter robe," she said, but her mother-in-law had other ideas. "All the robes will be made of marten," she ordered the seamstress, "and all will be trimmed in otter." "But sea otter is mine," the young woman wailed. "My husband brought it for me. Why should your robe be finer than those of my other sons' wives? All should be the same. By itself, the white otter pelt will only make one robe, but it's enough to trim them all." The vain young woman could see from her sisters-in-law's faces that they agreed with the mother-in-law. She also noticed her husband's displeased look, so she let the matter drop and the otter was shared. As time passed, the hostility between the two women was kept in check. Finding herself outmaneuvered, the young wife appeared submissive, resisting only occasionally. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, was growing older and was too much troubled with her own aches and pains to look for arguments with her daughter-in-law. But the passage of time did not lessen the young woman's spirit or resourcefulness or her self-interest. On her own, she had devised an ingenious way of catching large amounts of herring. With strings of red cedar bark, she wove hemlock boughs together to make a kind of apron, which she tied around her waist. Then she went out to a flat rock that was out of water at low tide and sat on it, letting the apron fall around the base of the rock. When the tide came in, the herring came with it and swam among the branches. As fish collected in her apron, the young woman threw them up on the beach. Then she took them to the house and cooked them for her dinner, never sharing them with her in-laws. She did this every day during the herring season, carefully putting her apron away each time when she reached the house. One day her ailing mother-in-law had heard her cooking the herring. "What is that you are cooking, my son's wife?" Oh, just some clams I collected on the beach. I would like some. I am hungry," she said in her still imperious manner. The mother-in-law bent over the fire dutifully as though picking up a roasting clam with her cooking tool, but she took a hot rock instead and dropped it into her mother-in-law's outstretched hand. "That's hot," she cried, dropping it to the ground. "You have burned my hand." Then she realized what she had dropped was no clam. "A rock. You put a hot rock in my hand. You wicked woman. Wait until my son hears of this." Then the old woman hurried about, showing her burn to the other women. "What a cruel thing to do," crooned one. "That girl has a mean streak. How selfish not to give you a taste of the fish. She has always thought only of herself," another said. "She does think she is a little better than the rest of us," a third added. By the time her husband arrived home from hunting, a crowd of sympathizers had gathered around the mother, and they wasted no time in telling him of the incident. Then his mother showed him her hand. "See what your wife has done? She has burned my hand with a hot rock." "A hot rock? How? Why?" "I asked for some of the fish she was cooking. She said they were clams, but they smelled like fish." "What kind of fish? Where would she get fish?" the son asked. "I don't know, but every morning after you leave, she goes off somewhere and does not return until late afternoon. We see her heading toward Herring Rock sometimes," one of the women volunteered. "She likes to be by herself." The husband's anger grew with each revelation. This wife of his was becoming a real embarrassment. Many times she had been ill-natured toward him, accusing him of siding with his mother in their disagreements. More than once his friends had made remarks suggesting he could not control her. He had spoken sharply to her on one or two recent occasions and thought the situation had improved. But this outbreak was worse than anything that had happened so far, and the women were angry that his wife had treated his mother badly. "I will take care of this matter when I get back," he told the women. "Now my brother and I must unload our deer and return to the hunting grounds." As he went back to the boat, he thought about the incident, saying to himself, "I must deal more severely with my wife. Her behavior is becoming a real problem, but first I had better see what she is up to on those mysterious trips." Several men followed him down to help unload the game. "Where did you find all these deer?" one asked. "We hunted all morning and found nothing." "Your hunting spirits must be working overtime," another joked. The husband smiled but kept silent. When the deer had all been taken out and hung up to season, the husband and the brother set out again toward the hunting grounds. After they had gone only a short way, the husband turned the boat back toward a spot where they could see what was going on in the village. There they were able to see for themselves how the young wife put on the apron of hemlock boughs and, leaving her basket higher on the beach where the tide would not reach it, headed for the rock. They watched in amazement as she took the fish that caught in her hemlock apron and flung them onto the beach. When there were enough to fill the basket, she went ashore to collect them and headed for home. "Let's go over there and catch a load of herring for ourselves," the husband said. "I have an idea." When they had a full load, they headed for home and beached the boat. Then they went up to the house. "Are you coming home from hunting already?" "Are you home from hunting already?" his wife asked. "The women told me you went out to get more deer after unloading your catch. We came upon a large run of herring and have a boatload of it down there," he told her. "Herring!" she cried, and ran down to the canoe. "Excuse me, look at all that herring," she said, running her hands through the catch that was overflowing the canoe. She turned to get her basket, but it was not there. "My basket!" She looked all around her. "I must have forgotten it in the excitement. Bring me my basket," she called to the people up at the house. "I want to fill it with fish." Again she dug her hands deeply into the herring, lifting up some to look at it more carefully. They are so firm and fresh," she murmured. Then she noticed that nobody was coming down and called more loudly, "Bring me my basket." But the people, annoyed at her cruelty to her mother-in-law, ignored her. Impatient, she shouted louder and louder, "Bring me my basket, my basket, my basket." "Woodacat, woodacat, woodacat," in Tlingit. Still no one came, yet she seemed unable to go up to get it herself. The fish seemed to hold her to them like a magnet. "My basket, my basket, basket, basket," she continued to cry. Still nobody heeded her. They looked over at the woman's husband. "Let it be. Stay here," was all he said. He seemed to be muttering to himself, but they could not hear what he was saying. "Let her become an owl," he had uttered in a very low voice. All through the night the woman stayed by the canoe and called for her basket. Toward morning the people noticed that her cries had changed. "Woo, woo, woo," she was now repeating only the first syllable of woodacat, probably too exhausted to say the whole word, and her voice sounded strange too, like a hooting of an owl. "Woo, woo, woo, woo," she cried over and over. Then her voice became more distant. She began to back away from the herring-filled canoe, and as she moved farther and farther, she took on the appearance of an owl. She kept calling "woo, woo, woo," and gradually went out of sight. The people were stunned. Had she really become an owl, or did she just look like one? Would she return? Many days went by, and there was no sign of her. "He changed her into an owl," one of the old women said. "The husband, he has shaman powers, you know." The people looked at her, perplexed. Then they thought a while about what she had said. "Maybe he does have some special powers," one of the men volunteered. "He has always brought in bigger loads of fish and game than the rest of us. He always knows the right places to hunt or fish. His deceased uncle was a great shaman," the old woman went on, encouraged by their responses. "Maybe he passed on some of his powers to his nephew." Now they were all listening to her. The powerful weasel was one of his aides. "The weasel," the people exclaimed. Then they began to murmur among themselves. The weasel was the chief aide to the shaman when he needed magic or wanted to foretell the future. Yes, they agreed. The weasel's power could have changed the man's wife into an owl. So they took the owl for their crest, and raised a pole in its honor. At the top they carved an owl, and at the base a weasel. The owl can predict bad weather, they said, assuming that it got its power from the weasel, and we can understand it because it was once woman. From that time on, when a young girl behaved selfishly, people would say to her, "When you get married, you will put a hot rock in your mother-in-law's hand, and for punishment, you will be turned into an owl." And that's just one of these stories. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Kushtaka's correctly, but I've enjoyed these stories, and I hope you have too.